Good day, folks. This is Greg Judy at Green Pastures Farm. Today I'm at Appomattox in Virginia. This is where the Civil War came to an end of Robert E. Lee and Ulysses S. Grant. A lot of history right here. You learn and read about the American history and the Civil War here in the United States, and you just forget how many people were killed. And golly, 700,000 Americans died in that war, and a lot of them were from just wounds. They didn't have any treatment, wasn't any antibiotics or anything like that. If you got shot in the gut or anywhere, you either lost a leg or an arm, or that was the best part. If they could get it off before you got worse than that, you just died of your wounds. This is the courthouse at Appomattox, and we already went through that. It's a magnificent museum in there. I would recommend any American that hasn't been here ought to come just once. Once in your lifetime, you need to come here and look at, this was the beginning of what, solidified this country, was getting rid of the Civil War. And it's just hard to believe, brother fighting brother, father against son, and just depending on what side you were on, and wow. It's just sombering. I mean, we've been through looking at the weapons and the way they lived, and this is hard times. But basically, this all came to an end right here in Appomattox. There was just a small town here, 100 people. And they cut off, Robert E. Lee had right at 25 to 30,000 troops coming in here. And he was going to try and break through to get to North Carolina to another general that had a big column of troops there. And Grant, the federal forces were quick enough that they came in and captured his supply lane where he couldn't resupply. There was a wagon train here that had thousands of rations for the Confederate soldiers, but the Union forces beat him and cut off the food and his supplies and actually surrounded him. But that morning, this is on, I'll get the date wrong, but it was in April. I believe it was the morning of, oh shoot, I'm not even going to throw the day out there. It was the middle of April. And, he didn't give up. He was going to try and escape, and he had one direction that he could go, and they cut him off. And the battle before this one was Sailor's Creek, and Robert E. Lee lost 8,000 troops on that one battle. And so they were weakened, they were tired, they were hungry. And finally, Robert E. Lee, they'd been talking back and forth, just sending little messages back between them. And finally, he sent out the white flag. And right that house in the distance there, that's the McLean house. That great big one over there with the columns in front of it. That's where the treaty was signed to end the Civil War. The McLean house. And Robert E. Lee came in with his few of his top men, and of course Grant was there as well with his. And there's a painting over there. It's a really neat room, and the first depictions were wrong. They actually had General, well, he wasn't, I don't know if he's a general, George Custer, the one that perished at the hands of the Indians out in South Dakota. He was there, but he wasn't in the house. He was outside the house. But the paintings actually have him in there at the signing. There's just unbelievable. The weapons that were used, the crudeness of it, the bayonets, how they fixed bayonets and charged each other. It was just a gruesome, gruesome war. And what I didn't realize is how quickly they, within 5 days of signing the end of the Civil War, John Wilkes Booth shot President Lincoln assassinated him. And I didn't realize it was that quick. And, you know, Lincoln had told him, had given instructions to Grant that when he signed the end, you know, he got the surrender, he said, look, I want the country to be at one. I don't want this fighting any longer. You give them their papers, and that was all done right there in the jail, right behind me, right there. This was, I'm sorry, it was a tavern, not the jail, the tavern. They set up I already looked at it, there's printing presses set up in there. And they printed all the Confederate soldiers their papers so they could go home. And they could take, you know, federal trains. All they had to do is lay the weapons down. And they were all starving to death. They were hungry. And so just to show a little kindness to the troops that he conquered, he gave them rations that they had captured. He said, look, we're going to feed you. We're going to give you something to eat. And one request that Robert E. Lee had from Grant before he signed it, the surrender, he says, hey, can my guys have their horses? Can they have their horses to return back to their farms? And of course Grant goes, yes, absolutely, because he knew a horse was critical for, you know, working the farm. And so they were allowed to take their horses. They had to lay their weapons down. And 5 days later, Lincoln was assassinated at Ford's Theater. He was watching a play there, and Booth snuck up behind him and shot him in the head with a revolver. But he died the next day. But there was huge, huge concern that right after they just signed it, and then the president was assassinated, that the whole thing would go. I mean, it was just, they weren't sure, you know, if the treaty would hold, and there'd be factions out fighting each other again, and the United States didn't even get started, just be complete, utter chaos again. But it held, you know, and thank goodness it did, and we have the United States of America today as a result of it. But, you know, peace had to start somewhere, and it started right here. And they're actually doing a talk over there now. I'm going to go join them. Jan and my sister are over there. And I just wanted to make this video. This is the history, huge history here. And it's Appomattox, Virginia. And yeah, it's just a really neat, if you're a history buff and you want to know the history of our country, right here it is. Come and check it out in Virginia. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and sign off and get over to the next talk. And you all have a great one, and hit that subscribe button on the way out, and I'll see you down the road.